Stornvik does not appear on most maps of the late 19th century. Even in the archives of the Luleå County Administration, it is rarely mentioned, and almost always in connection with land disputes or the disappearance of livestock. Letter from District Constable Erik Malmström, 4th November, 1896. By the last quarter of the 19th century, Stornvik was a small fishing settlement on the northeastern shore of the Bothnian Bay, about 40 kilometers south of Tornio. The landscape was severe. Boggy lowlands broken by ridges of granite, a shoreline carved into countless small coves, and forests of dark pine where even in summer the light seemed faded and cold. The climate was unforgiving. Winters often dropped below -30 degrees Celsius, with blizzards lasting for days. Summers brought their own form of isolation, a sea fog so dense that it could hide a neighbor's house at 50 paces. The air carried the sharp scent of resin and salt, and the gulls' cries were often swallowed in the damped silence. Stornvik's architecture reflected its poverty and practicality. Most houses were low, built from unstripped pine logs, roofed in wooden shingles or turf to hold in the warmth. The economy was semi-subsistence, fishing, trapping, and small-scale farming supplemented by rare trips to the market in Luleå. Only one building stood apart from the rest, the Krajholm house. Erected in 1821 on a stone foundation, it was 2 stories tall, with unusually narrow windows and a steeply pitched attic roof. It was built by Göran Krajholm, a merchant from Gothenburg who had married a local woman, Elvira Nordland. The Krajholm family ran a fish processing warehouse and maintained the only wine cellar in the district, one that by local rumor stocked goods beyond official trade routes. Like many isolated northern communities, Stornvik clung to older beliefs beneath its Lutheran surface. Elderly fishermen still made offerings to the sea, a coin, a drop of blood from a fingertip, to keep the waters fed, as they put it. Outsiders were viewed with suspicion, and in the long winters, gossip traveled faster than the post. The Krajholms were respected for their wealth and for feeding hungry families during lean years, but they were also the subject of murmured speculation. Whispers spoke of old rites said to be conducted by Elvira in the attic room. The earliest recorded suggestion of something amiss dates to 17th February 1872, when parish records by Pastor Mattias Johansson include this note: "Today we buried Karl Eklund, fisherman, whose body was found upon the shore 3 versts north of Stornvik. The skin of his face was paler than is natural, as if bloodless, though no wounds were visible. A rope was found about his wrist, severed crudely. The people say he was often at the Krajholm house." In the years that followed, several other incidents troubled the village. 1875, Anna-Lisa Krajholm, the youngest daughter of Göran, vanished. She was last seen at dusk on the fog-shrouded pier. No trace was found. 1881, fisherman Lars Pettersson reported to the constable that one night he saw a woman in a white dress standing perfectly still in the attic window of the Krajholm house, though the rest of the house was in darkness. A police report filed by Constable Malmström on 23 March 1881 reads, "Pettersson appears sober and consistent in his statement, claims the figure's head inclined slowly toward the shore before vanishing. Upon inspection, the attic window was locked from within. No footprints in the snow below, despite the ground being bare of new fall for 3 days prior." Though these events were noted, no formal investigation took place. The remoteness of Stornvik, the reluctance of its inhabitants to speak to outsiders, and the absence of clear evidence left each case as nothing more than an unsettling entry in an otherwise unremarkable parish ledger. What no one could know at the time was that these were only the first shadows of something that would, over the next 3 decades, become one of the most disturbing and enduring mysteries in Norrbottens' recorded history. The Krajholm family and their reputation. Among the merchants of the northern coast, the Krajholms were unusual, too refined for the fisheries, too secretive for the town markets, yet always able to produce goods that should not have been here. Extract from the private journal of Lars O. Hedlund, trader, 9th May, 1887. The Krajholm lineage in Stornvik began with Joran Krajholm, 1791 to 1868, born in Gothenburg to a family of ship chandlers. In 1819, while accompanying a coastal shipment to Luleå, he met Elvira Nordland, daughter of a fisherman. Within 2 years, he had not only married her, but also secured a land grant on a ridge overlooking the bay, an unusual move for a man of his trade. The grant papers, preserved in the county archive, list the official purpose as storage and processing of fish for regional sale. From the outset, the Krajholm enterprise operated differently from the other fisheries. Their catches were modest, yet their storerooms remained full. Crates of goods, salted fish, barrels of preserved berries, and, on occasion, imported liquor would appear on the dock in the early mornings, often without witnesses to their arrival. Elvira was remembered as a striking woman, tall, with dark hair unusual in that part of Sweden. Accounts from the period differ in tone. Some villagers described her as a generous hostess, others as a woman who watched you too closely. She kept careful records of household accounts, many written in a cipher that remains undeciphered in the surviving ledgers. In 1868, when Joran died suddenly from what was recorded as heart failure during a storm, Elvira assumed full control of the business. It was during her sole management that the first murmurs of ritual practices began to circulate. A letter from schoolteacher Karin Falk to her sister in Luleå, dated 3 December 1874, contains the earliest surviving reference. There is talk that in the Krajholm attic stands a table of blackened wood on which no food is served, yet it is kept clean as if ready for guests. Children dare one another to run up to their door at night. The fishermen cross themselves when her light burns past midnight. The family itself comprised Elvira and 3 children, Johan, born 1823, Ingrid, born 1827, and Anna-Lisa, born 1858. By the 1880s, only Elvira and Anna-Lisa remained in Stornvik. Johan had moved to Umeå to work in shipping, and Ingrid's fate was, tellingly, never recorded in official parish registers after 1852. Following Anna-Lisa's disappearance in 1875, Elvira withdrew almost entirely from public life. Deliveries to the Krajholm warehouse continued, but no one reported seeing her travel to Luleå or engage in trade directly. Instead, goods were collected by intermediaries, fishermen from other villages, or in one case, a Sami trader whose name does not appear in tax rolls. By the end of the decade, the Krajholm name had become both a source of local pride for their historic role in the village's economy and a warning. Outsiders saw them as eccentric merchants,
The villagers saw them as custodians of something older, less easily explained. Unbeknownst to the wider world, the stage was being set for the first incident that would draw official attention from beyond Norrbotten, a winter tragedy that would mark the beginning of the Krajholm case in national records.
The first disappearances, 1872 to 1881. The years between 1872 and 1881 would later be referred to in court records as the foundation years of the Krajholm mystery, a period during which isolated incidents occurred without being connected, but which, in retrospect, show a pattern. Extract from investigative summary by Inspector Albin Radefors, Swedish State Police Archives, 1907. The death of Carl Eklund, February 1872. The first recorded anomaly came on 17 February 1872, when the body of 34-year-old fisherman Carl Eklund washed ashore north of Stornvik. According to parish records, he was found by two boys searching for driftwood. A note in Pastor Matthias Johansson's burial ledger reads, "The skin of his face was unnaturally pale, with a bluish tinge at the lips, though no wound could be found. Around his right wrist was a length of hemp rope, cut with a dull blade. The rope was wet, but free of seaweed, as though never fully submerged." Constable Malmström's initial field notes, preserved in the Luleå District Archives, describe the discovery site. Location: narrow shingle beach, approximately 3.1 kilometers north of Stornvik Pier. Tide, ebb, with ice forming along the shore. Weather: heavy fog, visibility 30 to 40 meters. Surroundings: gull tracks present, no human footprints other than those of the boys who reported the find. Condition of body: no water in lungs, no sand in nasal cavity, suggesting death did not occur by drowning. Eklund was known to frequent the Krajholm house in the evenings, reportedly to supply fresh catches directly to Elvira. No witness saw him alive in the 48 hours preceding his death. The disappearance of Anna-Lisa Krajholm, October 1875. On the evening of 21 October 1875, Anna-Lisa, aged 17, was last seen walking toward the pier in a rising fog. She carried a wicker basket, the contents of which were never recovered. Witness statement: Karen Falk, schoolteacher. "I told her she was meeting a trader from Luleå to deliver dried fish. I advised against the trip because the fog was heavy. She smiled and said, 'It will not be long.' That was the last I saw of her." The next morning, her shawl was found snagged on a nail protruding from the pier's west railing. The fabric was damp with sea wire, but not torn, and no footprints remained on the planks due to overnight frost. Constable Malmström reported searching the shoreline for 3 days without result. Notably, a portion of the pier's decking near the end was found to have been recently replaced. Fresh wood, still pale, secured with mismatched iron nails. The carpenter responsible was never identified. The attic window incident, March 19, 1881. On March 19, 1881, fisherman Lars Pettersson filed a report claiming to have seen a woman in a white dress standing in the attic window of the Krajholm house late at night. Pettersson's sworn statement: "The house was in darkness,
yet her figure was outlined against the glass. I called out once. She did not move. Then her head turned, slow-like, toward the shore, though the light was gone. When I came closer, the window was shut from the inside, and there was no mark in the snow below. Malmström's follow-up inspection found the attic door locked and the key missing from the household set. Elvira claimed to not know its whereabouts. Emerging pattern. Although each of these events was filed separately, later investigators would point out shared elements. All incidents occurred during periods of heavy fog. In each case, a link to the Krajholm property could be established within 48 hours before the disappearance or sighting. Physical evidence was either minimal or curiously well preserved, as if shielded from the natural environment. By the spring of 1881, whispers within Stornvik had solidified into an unspoken consensus. Misfortune followed those who crossed the Krajholm threshold too often. Yet without concrete proof, no formal charges or inquiries advanced beyond the parish level. It would take a far more public and far more violent incident to break that silence. That incident would come in the winter of 1889, on the frozen bay itself.
The Winter on the Ice, 1889. Had it been an ordinary accident, the case would have closed within the week. Instead, every witness agreed on the same impossible detail. The sound that came from beneath the ice was not the sound of water. Excerpt from deposition of Inspector Alvin Reedfors, Swedish State Police, 1890. Incident Summary. On 14 February 1889, 3 fishermen, Henrik Dahl, 42, Mats Sundström, 37, and Olaf Norgren, 28, set out from Stornvik to check herring nets anchored a kilometer offshore. The bay was frozen solid. Temperatures had been below -20 degrees Celsius for over a month. By dusk, only Dahl returned. Sundström and Norgren were never seen alive again. Sequence of events according to witness testimony. Dahl's statement given to Constable Malmström on the night of the 14th. We reached the nets without trouble. The first hole was fine. Fish taken, ice kept clear. At the second hole, we heard a sound like knocking from below. Sundström said it might be a seal. Norgren leaned over to check the rope. Then there was a crack, not loud, but sharp. The ice shifted under us. I pulled back, but the two of them were still crouched when the hole widened. I swear the water below was blacker than night. Sundström fell in first. Norgren reached for me. His face was white, eyes wide. Then he too was gone. There was a voice from the water, low and drawn out. I ran. I did not look back. Recovery efforts. The following morning, Malmström led a search party onto the ice. The second net hole was found enlarged to over 1.5 meters in diameter. No bodies were recovered. Forensic-style notes from Malmström's field book. Edges of ice around the hole smoothed, not jagged. Net rope frayed in multiple places, as if cut with a serrated blade. Unusual residue on ice surface, thin layer of oily film, faint smell of brine mixed with decay. Nearby ice bore no cracks or stress fractures, indicating localized collapse. A single object was recovered from the site, a leather glove belonging to Sundström. It was dry, found 12 meters from the hole, resting on top of the snow with no track leading to it. Rumors and connections. Dahl, while in shock, reportedly muttered in the presence of 2 villagers they were taken, the same way the girl was. This was interpreted by some to reference Annalisa Krajholm's disappearance in 1875. Adding to suspicion, Elvira Krajholm was seen that afternoon walking along the frozen shoreline, an unusual outing given her reclusive habits. No one reported seeing her carry fishing gear or a basket. Official response. Because 2 men were missing and presumed dead, the matter was escalated to the district level in Luleå. Inspector Reedfors arrived in Stornvik on 19 February 1819, marking the first formal state investigation into any incident linked directly or indirectly to the Krajholm name. His preliminary report to the county administration. No evidence of large predator activity, seal or otherwise, present. Hole edges too smooth for natural ice breakage under load. Subject Dahl's account consistent but contains improbable elements, namely auditory phenomena described as a voice, recommending continued inquiry with consideration of possible criminal interference in net tampering. Aftermath. The search was called off on 24 February. With no bodies recovered, Sundström and Norgren were declared legally dead by drowning. Dahl left Stornvik later that spring and never returned. Locals, however, were unconvinced of a simple accident. By the end of 1889, the winter ice voice had entered village folklore, told in hushed tones to children as a warning to stay away from the bay in winter. Behind the official narrative, Reedfors's private field journal, discovered decades later, contains a final unfiled note. Oil sample from ice near second hole tested in Luleå, marine origin confirmed, but composition unlike that of herring or seal fat. Trace elements suggest deeper water species not present in Bothian Bay. No explanation offered by Fisheries Office. This incident cemented the Krajholm case as more than village superstition in the minds of investigators. Within a decade, more disappearances, this time of children, would bring national press to Stornvik and force open the doors of the Krajholm house. The Fishermen's Accounts and the Fog Years, 1890 to 1896. The fog in Stornvik is not like fog elsewhere. It swallows sound as well as sight. When it comes in from the bay, the village seems to be cut from the world, and things happen that no one will put to paper unless pressed by oath. Interview with retired constable Erik Malmström, recorded 1908. The Fog Years. Between 1890 and 1896, official parish records in Stornvik show no deaths by violence, no accidents severe enough to draw district-level attention. Yet during this same period, multiple informal testimonies suggest a pattern of encounters in heavy fog, most involving the shoreline near the Krajholm property. Locals referred to these seasons simply as the fog years. Several fishermen, in depositions later collected by Inspector Reedfors, described hearing sounds over the water that did not resemble wind, waves, or any known marine animal. Testimony: Lars Pettersson, February 1891. Pettersson, who had previously reported the attic window figure in 1881, gave the following account under oath. I was returning from setting traps. Fog thick enough I could not see the mast of my own boat. Somewhere off my starboard side, I heard 3 knocks, spaced evenly like from a hammer on wood. Then a pause, and a sound like someone breathing through water. I tied my line to a buoy and stayed still. After a while, it was gone. When the fog lifted, I found myself anchored 50 meters from the Krajholm pier, though I had set course for the opposite shore. Testimony. Anders Wiklund, June 1893. Wiklund, a seasonal worker from Kalix, claimed he encountered Elvira Krajholm on the southern beach. The fog had rolled in sudden-like. I heard her voice call my name, though I had never met her before. When I turned, she stood 10 paces away, holding a basket covered in cloth. I swear I saw the cloth move as if something inside shifted. She asked if I wanted to earn my keep. I refused, stepped back, and then she was gone. The fog cleared, and I was alone. Malmström's note on this statement reads simply, "No corroborating witness. Subject appears sober, but unsettled. Possible fabrication." Unexplained vessel, August 1895. In late summer 1895, 2 boys reported seeing a dark, low-profile boat tied at the Krajholm pier in the early hours before dawn. The boat, described as narrower than any fishing craft, bore no lantern and no registration markings. By the time adults arrived to investigate, it was gone. Interestingly, in the same week, parish delivery records show an unexplained increase in goods shipped from Stornvik. 8 barrels of salted herring more than the previous month, despite poor catches reported by all other fishermen. Patterns and obstacles. By 1896, Reedforce had privately compiled a file on the Krajholm family that included 9 separate fog-related witness accounts, 3 mentions of Elvira speaking to strangers at the shoreline, 2 unexplained shipments from the Krajholm warehouse, the 1872, 1875, 1881, and 1889 incidents. But without physical evidence, the case was still officially non-criminal. Reedforce complained in correspondence with the county administration. The community is resistant to questioning. Witnesses alter statements within days, citing fear of social reprisal. Parish officials unwilling to authorize searches without direct order. Recommend outside jurisdictional authority if any formal action is to be taken. The turning point. That recommendation would bear fruit the same year. In November 1896, a supply cutter from Luleå, delayed by early ice, arrived in Stornvik with a passenger, an assistant to the district governor. His purpose was to investigate reports of trade irregularities involving untaxed goods. Within a week, his attention would be redirected entirely after he heard the first-hand account of a man who claimed to have seen, inside the Krajholm attic, something that was neither man nor animal, but the size of both.
That conversation would lead to the first formal attempt to search the Krajholm property in over 20 decades.
The 1896 attempted search. We were less than an hour from beginning the search when smoke began pouring from the outbuilding. By the time the fire was out, there was nothing left but warped nails and stone. Someone in that house knew we were coming. Statement by Deputy Inspector Harald Nindström, Luleå District Office, 1896. Background. The arrival of Johan Berglund, assistant to the district governor, in late November 1896 was officially to audit Stornvik's fish trade. However, his stay at the parsonage brought him into contact with Henrik Boström, a transient laborer recovering from frostbite. Boström claimed that 2 nights earlier, while delivering kindling to the Krajholm house, he had glimpsed through a partially open attic door a shape as broad as the stairwell, crouched low, with a glint of wetness along its back. He swore Elvira had shut the door at once, offering him double pay if he left the house without speaking to anyone. Berglund, intrigued and aware of prior incidents in parish rumor, reported this directly to his superiors in Luleå. The next day, a team was dispatched: Deputy Inspector Harald Nindström, Constable Malmström, and 2 laborers acting as porters. The plan. The search warrant, issued under suspicion of unlawful goods storage, authorized entry into all buildings on the Krajholm property. The intention was to begin with the warehouse and outbuildings, then proceed to the main house and attic. Official arrival time on 3 December 1896 was 10:15 a.m. The temperature was -18 degrees Celsius with light wind from the bay. Elvira met the party at the door, appearing calm but refusing entry without proper cause, despite the signed warrant. Nindström's report notes: Subject appeared unsurprised by our presence. Eyes moved repeatedly toward the south-facing window during conversation. Gave verbal consent only after extended reading of the warrant. At that time, smoke observed from a small outbuilding to west. The fire. The outbuilding in question, a storage shed adjoining the fish warehouse, was engulfed within minutes. Witnesses agreed the fire burned with unusual intensity, emitting a heavy, acrid odor not consistent with dry timber. Field notes from Constable Malmström. Contents burned: unidentifiable debris, partially melted jars of glass, twisted copper wire. Fire pattern: center origin, no clear accelerant detected. Smell distinct from lamp oil. Discovery of scorched but intact bone fragments, species unconfirmed, later misplaced during transport to Luleå. The blaze delayed the search of the main house until mid-afternoon. By then, Elvira claimed she had secured the attic for safety due to a damaged floor beam. Partial search of the main house. The lower floor revealed nothing unusual. Kitchen, sitting room, 2 small bedrooms, all meticulously clean. The only anomaly recorded was the absence of any family portraits or personal decorations, uncommon for rural Swedish homes of the period. When asked about the attic, Elvira insisted it was unsafe. Nindström, noting the warrant, ordered the door opened. The key produced by Elvira did not fit the lock. The lock itself was heavy, blackened iron, of a make older than the house. Berglund's private notes, found in his papers after his death in 1902, described the moment. When Nindström placed his ear to the attic door, I saw him stiffen. He told me later he heard movement, slow, deliberate, then a sound like water draining through wood. No further attempt was made to open it. Withdrawal. The search concluded without entry to the attic. The official report cited obstruction of access and loss of potential evidence in fire. Berglund returned to Luleå the next morning. Nindström stayed 2 additional days but made no further progress. Aftermath and rumor. Within a week, the remains from the burned-out outbuilding, including the bone fragments, had vanished from the Lulea evidence room. No record exists of their transfer or destruction. In Stornvik, word spread quickly that the attic had been fed before the search party arrived. While no one would say what fed meant, several older villagers were seen throwing fish heads into the tide that week, a custom not practiced openly for years. This failure to secure evidence or even enter the room suspected would haunt the investigation. It would also embolden Elvira, whose public reappearances became more frequent in the years leading up to the next major incident, the burning of the Krajholm fish warehouse in 1898.
The warehouse fire of 1898. It burned too fast for wet timber, and the records went with it. Every ledger from the past 20 years gone in under an hour. Extract from Constable Malmström's final field report on the Krajholm property, 1898. The night of the fire. On the evening of 6th September 1898, at approximately 11:40 p.m., a fire broke out in the Krajholm fish warehouse, the largest structure on the property after the main house. The night was calm, with only a faint onshore breeze. Witnesses described seeing a brief, bright flash inside the building before the flames spread. The first villager to raise the alarm was Johan Pettersson, who had been mending nets on his porch. "I saw the window glow, like lightning trapped inside. Then the whole side of the building lit up. By the time I reached the door with my bucket, the heat was too much to get near." Structure and contents. The warehouse was a 2-story timber building with a stone foundation, measuring approximately 18 by 9 meters. The upper floor was used for drying fish. The lower floor contained barrels of salted herring, casks of imported wine and spirits, and most importantly to the investigation, the Krajholm business records. These records were kept in a locked iron safe in a small office at the rear of the lower floor. The safe was known to be too heavy to move without dismantling the floor. When the fire was extinguished around 1 a.m., the safe was found open, empty, and warm to the touch. The lock plate had been removed cleanly, as if by skilled hands, before the flames reached it. Suspicious sightings. 2 separate witnesses reported seeing an unfamiliar man leaving the property by the shoreline path less than half an hour before the fire began. Descriptions match. Height, approximately 180 centimeters. Dark oilskin coat, carrying a satchel or small trunk, limp in left leg. No one in Stornvik claimed to know him, and no such person was ever traced through port or customs records. Investigation findings. Constable Malmström's notes from the scene. Rate of fire inconsistent with fish oil or lamp oil alone. Char patterns suggest ignition points on both floors simultaneously. No remains of ledgers, shipping logs, or correspondence. Total loss of documented trade history since at least 1878. One unburned item recovered, a short length of braided rope, stiff with salt, and an oily residue similar to that found on the ice in the 1889 incident. The rope was sent to Luleå for analysis, but like the bone fragments from 1896, it disappeared from storage before results could be recorded. Elvira's reaction. Multiple villagers later recounted that Elvira watched the warehouse burn from her upper balcony without speaking. She did not attempt to fight the fire and refused to answer questions from Malmström, stating only, "What is gone was not yours to keep." She made no move to rebuild the warehouse. Instead, she shifted all business operations to the main house, increasing her privacy and further restricting access to her property. Impact on the investigation. The destruction of the warehouse effectively severed any paper trail connecting the Krajholms to outside trade. For Reedforth and Berglund's successors in the Luleå district office, the case now lacked the financial evidence that could have justified repeated searches. Unofficially, the fire deepened local suspicion that the Krajholms' dealings involved not just smuggling, but the exchange of something or with something beyond ordinary commerce. Prelude to the 1901 disappearances. From 1898 onward, Elvira was rarely seen outside the property except during the thickest fogs, when she was observed walking the tide line at dawn. It was during one of these fogs, 3 years later, that the most notorious incident in Stornvik's history occurred: the disappearance of 3 children in a single day.
The vanishing of the 3 children, 1901. I heard them laughing along the shoreline, though the tide had already swallowed half the sand. Then nothing, not a footstep, not a cry. Statement of Greta Lund, neighbor, taken 14 June 1901. The morning of the disappearances. On 13 June 1901, 3 children from Stornvik, Anna Lund, 7, Erik Jansen, 6, and little Sven Björk, 5, were reported missing by their parents. They had been playing along the narrow coastal strip east of the Krajholm estate, where driftwood and small fishing shacks were common. Witnesses stated that the children were last seen between 9:15 and 9:30 a.m. 2 local laborers, Carl Persson and Johan Holm, observed them running toward the tide line near a cluster of rocks. Persson recalled, "They were laughing, pointing to something among the rocks. I thought it was driftwood, but then the oldest girl screamed once, high and clear, and they all vanished." No signs of struggle or drowning were immediately found. Initial search. A village-wide search ensued. The police from Luleå arrived the same afternoon under the supervision of Constable Malmström, still active in the region. Key findings. No footprints leading away from the rocks. Small fragments of what appeared to be torn clothing, consistent with Anna Lund's dress. A shallow depression in the sand containing faint traces of dried blood. The most alarming evidence was discovered near the edge of the water, a scattering of small fish bones arranged in a triangular pattern. These were identical to the type of fish the Krajholm estate processed, suggesting that the children had been brought to or near the property. Elvira's Krajholm was seen that morning in the fog, walking along the tide line, but when approached, she claimed only, "The tide takes what is owed. I have no part in this day's work." The cryptic statement alarmed villagers, who already whispered about her prior incidents. However, Malmström noted there was no proof linking her directly to the disappearance. Discovery at the attic. On 16 June 1901, 2 local boys exploring the southern end of the Krajholm estate reported that the attic door of the main house appeared ajar. Their father, Olof Lindgren, documented the discovery.
I opened the attic slowly. The smell hit me first, thick, sour, like old fish and something I cannot name. Inside, it was dark, nothing alive, but the floor had scratches, deep, as if claws had marked them. Despite the attic's condition, no bodies were found. Only several small wooden toys, broken, charred, and coated in the same oily residue found on the 1898 rope, were collected as evidence. Local reaction and folklore. The disappearances spread fear throughout Stornvik. Villagers began to avoid the shoreline near the Krajholm estate, speaking of the place the tide whispers to. Some claimed that on foggy mornings the faint sound of children laughing could be heard, though no living children were ever seen. Malmström's report concluded, "There is insufficient evidence for prosecution. The disappearance may have been due to natural causes, yet circumstances suggest interference by persons unknown. Local testimony remains conflicting and incomplete." Lingering mystery. No trace of Anna, Eric, or Sven was ever found. The toys and the scratches in the attic were all that remained, preserved in Luleå for decades, until lost during the 1940s municipal reorganization. The incident cemented the Krajholm estate as a site of fear and speculation. Villagers reported that the fog around the property seemed unnaturally thick in the mornings following the disappearance, and whispers of feeding the tide resurfaced in local tales.
The 1912 investigation. Letters, diaries, and unseen rooms. These walls keep their own counsel. I fear that what lies behind them was never meant to see the light of day. Excerpt from Inspector Berglund's Field Notes, 23 July, 1912. Background. By 1912, the Krajholm estate had become infamous across northern Sweden, known for the unsolved disappearance of 3 children in 1901 and the mysterious warehouse fire of 1898. Pressure from local authorities and persistent rumors prompted Inspector Sven Berglund from Luleå to initiate a formal inquiry into the estate's history and practices. Berglund's approach was methodical. He relied on interviews, letters, diaries, and any surviving documentation from the estate's operations. Discovery of letters. During the investigation, a local schoolteacher, Hedvig Nielsen, handed over a bundle of letters she had received from Elvira Krajholm between 1905 and 1910. These letters contained cryptic references to family obligations and ritualistic practices. Quote, "The blood of the shore binds us to what must not be broken. Keep silent, or the tide will claim what you hold dear." End quote. Letter dated 14 April 1907. Another letter, written in a tight, spidery hand, warned, quote, "The house remembers every visitor. Those who pry too closely may join the vanished." End quote. Letter dated 22 September 1909. Berglund noted the tone of these letters was formal yet eerily personal, implying that Elvira's family had long established rules governing secrecy and perhaps something more sinister. Diaries and local testimony. Berglund also acquired fragments of a diary belonging to Jonas Krajholm, Elvira's brother, who died in 1896 under mysterious circumstances. One entry, dated 5 August 1895, reads, quote,
Father says the line must be protected. Tonight the tide takes what is owed. I saw nothing of it, yet I heard them crying. It is for the family's survival." End quote. This reference to the line became central to Berglund's hypothesis. The Krajholm family may have been following a hereditary practice involving strict control over both property and people who entered their vicinity. Inspection of the estate. On 24 July 1912, Berglund and his assistants examined the Krajholm house itself. The main house was a timber-framed structure with 3 floors and a steep, slate-covered roof. Its rooms were dark, cluttered, and narrow, with faint smells of smoke and fish oil lingering in corners and behind floorboards. During the search, the team discovered a hidden door behind a false panel in the library. The doorway led to a narrow stairwell descending below the house into a subterranean chamber. Inside, they found, quote, "a small collection of children's toys, broken and coated with an oily residue," end quote. Stains on the stone floor, difficult to identify after years of cleaning and exposure to moisture. Old, partially burned documents describing shipments and family obligations. Berglund noted, quote, "the room bore the mark of intent, everything placed, nothing random. The toys, the marks, the residues, they were part of a system I do not understand." End quote. Obstacles to investigation. The investigation faced multiple challenges. Destroyed records. The warehouse fire of 1898 eliminated the most critical ledgers. Family secrecy. Elvira refused to answer direct questions, responding only with, "What you seek is not yours to find." Physical dangers. Several officers reported fainting or disorientation in the hidden chamber, and one assistant later described hearing a low, unearthly whispering from the walls, though no other person was present. These elements reinforced the impression that the house itself was a repository of secrets, both mundane and possibly inexplicable. Conclusion of the 1912 inquiry. Berglund's final report concluded that, quote, "the Krajholm family operated according to highly secretive practices, likely including some form of ritual or structured secrecy. Evidence suggested a connection to previous disappearances, though no direct proof of criminal activity was found. The hidden rooms and remaining artifacts indicated a long-standing pattern of controlling knowledge and limiting access to outsiders." End quote. The report ended ambiguously. "We can document irregularities, fear, and missing persons, but the full truth of the Krajholm estate remains beyond the reach of inquiry. Whether by design or coincidence, the house holds its silence as fiercely as its mistress." End quote. The 1924 excavation. Bones, artifacts, and the tide's whisper. I cannot tell whether the sound came from the wind, the water, or something that still lingers beneath the house. Excavator Anders Holm, Field Note, 12 September 1924. By 1924, Stornvik's fear of the Krajholm estate had persisted for decades. After years of inconclusive inquiries, a team of archaeologists and municipal investigators, led by Professor Lars Eklund, received authorization to conduct a partial excavation around the property. The project aimed to locate any physical evidence of the disappearances and to catalog artifacts from the estate. Eklund's notes describe the site meticulously. The house is situated upon a slight rise overlooking the jagged coastline.
The ground is a mixture of sand and clay, prone to pockets of brackish water. The tide floods sections unpredictably, which may explain the persistence of unrecorded artifacts near the shore. Initial findings. Excavation began on 7 September 1924. Within the first 2 days, workers uncovered fragments of children's clothing and personal items buried in shallow pits near the shoreline. Notably, the team discovered a small carved wooden figurine, partially charred and coated with what appeared to be dried fish oil. A pair of small shoes belonging to no child in the village records at the time. Several ceramic shards etched with indistinct symbols. Professor Eklund's diary entry from 9 September 1924 reflects unease. These items suggest repeated, intentional deposition. The arrangement is neither casual nor accidental. Patterns may exist that we do not yet perceive. Discovery of human remains. On 11 September, a deeper trench near the northern edge of the property revealed skeletal remains. The bones were incomplete, weathered, and partially intermingled with shells and driftwood. Osteological analysis indicated that they belonged to children aged 4 to 8, consistent with the missing individuals reported in 1901. The bones were arranged unnaturally, limbs bent at sharp angles, and the skulls positioned facing inward. Eklund wrote, "It is impossible to determine if this arrangement is the result of post-mortem manipulation or erosion. The pattern is deliberate, yet the purpose eludes us entirely." The smell in the trench was repeatedly noted as acrid and metallic, lingering even when the wind shifted. Workers reported headaches and nausea, and some claimed to hear faint, distant laughter carried by the wind. Artifacts and oddities. Additional items recovered included small copper rings etched with tiny inscriptions matching those on previously discovered letters. Fragments of rope similar in weave and composition to the 1898 warehouse rope. Animal bones, primarily fish, arranged in triangular patterns near the skeletal remains. The arrangement suggested repeated rituals or depositions over time, though no historical records confirmed this. The tide and atmosphere. Excavators repeatedly noted the behavior of the tide. At high water, previously dry sections of the site were submerged, often erasing shallow traces of artifacts. Professor Eklund's journal entry reflects the unnerving conditions. At dawn, the tide comes swiftly, as though drawn by a will beyond observation. Instruments cannot measure the subtle rise, yet objects shift, sometimes disappearing entirely. One wonders if the estate itself dictates the boundaries of discovery. Several workers reported hearing footsteps across the sand or whispers in a language they could not recognize, though no one was present. Interruption and abandonment. By 15 September, excavation was abruptly halted. Several workers reported dizziness, cold sweats, and hallucinations. One assistant claimed, "I saw the children at the water's edge. They looked at me, then vanished into the fog. I know what I saw." Local authorities advised cessation of the project, citing safety concerns and unexplained phenomena. Only partial documentation and photographs of the site remained. Aftermath. The 1924 excavation yielded evidence confirming long-suspected disappearances and ritualistic activity at the estate, yet it raised more questions than it answered. Who arranged the skeletal remains and why? Were the repeated patterns near the shoreline ritualistic, practical, or something else? How did the estate influence the behavior of the tide, the soil, or the people who approached it? Professor Eklund's final report, filed in 1925, concludes ambiguously. "We have unearthed remnants of human presence and artifacts of an intentional, repeated practice. Yet the full truth of what occurred at the Krajholm estate remains inaccessible. It may lie beneath the tides, in the walls of the house, or within the minds of those who lived there."
The 1937 return, fire, confession, and the last Krajholm. I have lived with these walls all my life, and yet I cannot claim to understand them. The house keeps what it must. Elvida Krajholm, Statement to Police, 17 March 1937.
By 1937, the Krajholm estate had deteriorated. Following decades of rumors, partial investigations, and abandoned excavations, it was largely uninhabited except for Elvira Krajholm, the last known family member. Despite repeated inquiries, she had avoided direct scrutiny, living in near isolation and maintaining strict secrecy about the estate's interior. The Lulea Police Department received reports of smoke rising from the property on 17 March 1937, prompting a dispatch of officers and local fire brigades. Their arrival initiated what would become the final recorded sequence of Krajholm events. The fire. Witnesses described a sudden, intense blaze concentrated in the west wing of the house. According to firefighter Johan Lindström, the flames seemed to gather at the corners as though the house itself was feeding them. No strong wind, yet the fire spread with unnatural speed. Officers on the scene found Elvira waiting outside, covered in soot but unharmed. Her expression was described as detached by Officer Henrik Oberg, who noted, "She spoke calmly, offering to explain, but her eyes suggested a lifetime of watching what must not be spoken." Investigation into the fire revealed no conventional cause. Gas lines were intact and the main fireplace showed no signs of misuse. Investigators recorded scorch patterns inconsistent with ordinary combustion, though no formal explanation was made. Elvira's partial confession. During questioning, Elvira offered a fragmented confession referencing both the family's history and the hidden chambers. The children, the rooms beneath the floor, it was never meant to harm them. The family, the line, it must be preserved. Statement, 17 March 1937. She declined to clarify specifics, stating, "Some doors are not to be opened, some truths are not to be spoken, you will not understand." Her statement confirmed that the family's secret practices were intentional, intergenerational, and involved some form of hidden space or containment. However, it provided no concrete details about the missing children or the arrangement of artifacts discovered in earlier investigations. Police inspection. Authorities attempted a controlled entry into the damaged West Wing. They documented collapsed floors obscuring access to lower chambers, charred remnants of objects previously reported, including toys and personal items, faint traces of inscriptions on wooden beams partially destroyed by the fire. Police notes from Inspector Berglund Jr., who assisted at the scene, remarked, "Even amid destruction, the deliberate nature of placement is evident. The house resists inquiry. It conceals as much as it reveals." Attempts to locate the hidden stairwell discovered in 1912 were unsuccessful. Sections of the floor had collapsed or been destroyed in the fire. Disappearance of Elvira Krajholm. Following the fire and her partial confession, Elvira vanished from the village. Reports place her last sighting near the shoreline cliffs east of the estate, but she was never located. A final municipal notice dated April 2, 1937 states, "Elvira Krajholm, resident of Stornvik Estate, is missing. No trace has been found despite thorough search efforts. Case closed due to lack of evidence." Her disappearance effectively ended the Krajholm lineage. No subsequent family members claimed the estate, and the property fell into ruin, ultimately becoming a subject of local legend. Aftermath and local legend. By 1938, Stornvik residents had largely abandoned the area around the estate. Tales of whispers, shadows, and strange sounds persisted, often attributed to the lingering presence of the Krajholm family. Local historians documented recurring reports. Children speak of a figure in the windows. Fishermen say lights appear over the cliffs where none should exist. Notes from Stornvik Historical Society, 1940. The combination of fire, confession, disappearance, and unaccountable phenomena cemented the estate's reputation as a site of unease and unresolved mystery.
Legacy of silence. Stornvik after the Krajholms. The estate stands empty, yet its presence is felt in every gust of wind, in every shadow cast by the cliffs. Even abandoned, it speaks. Stornvik resident, oral history interview, 1942. Background. Following the disappearance of Elvira Krajholm in 1937, Stornvik entered a period of quiet decline. The estate, long a source of fear and fascination, fell into ruin, with broken windows, collapsing floors, and overgrown grounds. The local economy, primarily fishing and small-scale agriculture, suffered minimal direct impact from the family's disappearance, but the social and psychological effects were profound. Residents avoided the estate and its immediate surroundings. Children were warned never to approach, and fishermen refused to moor near the cliffs, citing inexplicable currents and eerie lights observed at night. Documented observations. Local historians and journalists compiled sporadic reports from 1938 to 1945. One Stornvik Gazette article from 1939 describes, "Stray lights appear in the windows, moving as though occupied, though no person resides there. The air carries a damp, metallic scent, particularly after storms." A municipal inspector, Håkan Lind, noted in 1941, "We conducted a formal survey of the estate. Floors are unsafe, walls sag under years of neglect, yet certain rooms retain a deliberate arrangement of debris. It is as if the house remembers its former purpose." Reports of strange occurrences persisted. Unexplained sounds resembling whispers or children laughing. Sudden gusts of cold air localized to certain areas of the ruins. Objects shifted overnight despite locked doors or collapsed access. Folklore and oral testimony. By the early 1940s, the Krajholm estate had become central to local folklore. Residents told stories of a spectral figure moving between windows, described as a woman in dark clothing with indistinct features. Footprints appearing in the sand near the cliffs, sometimes disappearing into thin air. Fishing nets and small boats mysteriously damaged or found empty, tied in knots that mirrored patterns noted in previous investigations. One interview with former fisherman Anders Jansen in 1942 records, "I saw her once, standing by the cliffs. She looked like she was calling to someone, or perhaps warning me. Then the fog swallowed her." These accounts, while anecdotal, formed a consistent pattern that echoed prior investigations. The estate exerted an influence over perception, movement, and memory. Ruins and archaeological notes. Amateur archaeologists visited the estate between 1940 and 1944, documenting collapsed floors concealing potential hidden chambers, rusted remnants of toys, tools, and artifacts from previous excavations, evidence that the estate's upper structures were deliberately reinforced in some areas while neglected in others, suggesting selective preservation. A journal entry by archivist Inge Dahl in 1943 describes, "Even among rubble, one senses order. The scattered objects form invisible lines, patterns only partially understood. Whether this is intentional or the mind imposing structure is uncertain." This reinforced the idea that the Krajholms had engaged in highly controlled arrangements whose purpose remained elusive. Psychological and cultural impact. Residents of Stornvik reported a lasting sense of unease, leading to changes in local behavior and storytelling. Key elements included avoidance of the estate and nearby cliffs,
oral transmission of warnings and accounts of unseen presences, rituals by villagers to ward off perceived lingering influence, including lighting candles along the shoreline and marking thresholds with salt. These responses illustrate a blending of empirical observation and superstition, creating a unique cultural imprint. Legacy of the Krajholm estate. By 1945, the Krajholm estate was widely acknowledged as a site of unresolved mystery. While no formal investigation succeeded in fully explaining the family's activities or the fate of their victims, the following conclusions emerged. The estate had been the site of repeated, deliberate human activity with complex arrangements of objects and remains. Multiple disappearances, particularly of children, were confirmed or strongly suspected. Psychological and physical phenomena persisted even decades after the family vanished. Enduring questions. Despite decades of study, several critical questions remained unanswered. What precisely occurred in the hidden chambers beneath the estate? Were the repeated arrangements of artifacts and skeletal remains ritualistic, symbolic, or functional? Did the estate exert an influence beyond human understanding, or were reports of ghostly phenomena purely psychological? As archivist Dahl concluded in 1944, the Krajholm estate is a palimpsest of human action, fear, and memory. Its truths are layered and incomplete, visible only in fragments.
Echoes and shadows, the Krajholm estate in memory and media. Stories grow like ivy over ruins. They twist, they bind, but they do not wholly conceal what came before. Journalist Sven Arvidsson, Reflection in Stornvik Chronicle, 1948. Post-war attention. Following World War II, the Krajholm estate attracted renewed interest from journalists, folklorists, and historians. Its notoriety had grown beyond Stornvik, featuring in regional newspapers as a symbol of lingering mystery and rural superstition. By 1946, Svenska Dagbladet published an extensive report titled The House That Whispers, which compiled historical records, oral testimonies, and archival photographs. The article cited police reports, eyewitness accounts, and fragments of letters from the Krajholm family. Notably, it reproduced portions of Elvira's 1937 statements. Some doors are not to be opened, some truths are not to be spoken. You will not understand. The journalist remarked on the persistent ambiguity of these words, noting that they had fueled speculation rather than resolved it. Academic and folklore analysis. Scholars studying Scandinavian folklore highlighted Stornvik as a site where legend and documented history intersected. Professor Ingrid Holmqvist of Uppsala University wrote in 1947, "The Krajholm estate serves as a unique case where oral tradition, documented crime, and material evidence converge. The boundary between empirical record and myth is porous here." Investigations focused on recurring motifs. Reports of spectral figures along cliffs and within the ruined house. Patterns of child disappearances and unaccounted deaths. The deliberate arrangement of objects, including toys and domestic items suggestive of a family ritual. Historians emphasized that while supernatural interpretations were common in popular accounts, the most reliable documentation pointed to human actions and secrecy rather than clear paranormal causation. Media coverage and sensationalism. By 1948, sensationalist newspapers had amplified rumors linking the Krajholms to occult practices, Satanism, and ancient Nordic rites.
While largely speculative, these accounts increased public fascination. One popular account described, "The Krajholms lived by a rule no outsider could follow, hidden in their halls beneath the floors where children vanished and shadows moved." The embellishments often contradicted archival evidence, yet they cemented the estate's status as a symbol of horror in Swedish rural memory. Preservation of evidence. Despite deterioration, fragments of the estate and its artifacts were preserved. The Stornvik Historical Society, led by archivist Inga Dahl, compiled photographs of collapsed floors and charred furniture, salvaged objects from earlier police investigations, copies of correspondence between Krajholm family members and municipal officials. Dahl emphasized careful documentation, noting, "Even in ruin, the estate speaks. Each object, each letter is a thread to the past. Together, they weave a story that is incomplete yet undeniable." These archives remain the primary source material for modern researchers. Community memory. For Stornvik residents, the Krajholm estate became a locus of collective memory. Children were still warned to avoid the cliffs, and adults recounted stories blending observation and legend. Oral histories recorded after 1945 consistently referenced strange lights and cold spots near the estate, sounds of movement where no one should be, recurring motifs of warning and secrecy. One interview with former resident Karin Lundqvist in 1949 stated, "Even after the last Krajholm disappeared, you could feel it. The house watches you, and the cliffs remember." These accounts suggest a long-lasting psychological impact independent of direct physical evidence. Enduring questions. By the late 1940s, it was clear that the Krajholm estate's mysteries would not be fully resolved. Investigators and scholars alike emphasized that some elements would remain unknown. The full extent of hidden chambers and possible human remains, the purpose of deliberately arranged objects, and the family's exact rituals. Journalist Sven Arvidsson summarized the enduring ambiguity in 1948. "The Krajholm estate is a story unfinished. Every document, every rumor, every ruin leaves questions unanswered. It is a house of shadows that refuses to release its secrets."
The final survey. We walked through the ruins not as trespassers, but as witnesses. What we saw could not be fully catalogued nor explained. It was as if the estate itself observed us. Inspector Lars Nyberg, Field Notes, 1950. Return to the estate. By 1950, the Krajholm estate had been largely abandoned for over a decade. A final formal survey was undertaken by a team of municipal officials, archaeologists, and folklorists, commissioned to document what remained before potential demolition or preservation efforts. The team included Inspector Lars Nyberg, municipal investigator with prior experience in Stornvik; Inga Dahl, archivist and historian who had documented the estate for over a decade; Professor Ingrid Holmqvist, folklorist specializing in Scandinavian rural legends. Their mission was to create a comprehensive record of the site and its artifacts, both for historical preservation and for clarity regarding prior mysteries. Observations and discoveries. The team's report, dated September 12, 1950, details the following. Structural condition. Major collapse in the western wing, exposing multiple floors of decayed wood.
walls showing evidence of deliberate reinforcement in specific areas consistent with previous amateur archaeological observations. Hidden staircases and blocked doorways, some leading to partially collapsed chambers. Artifacts and arrangements. Toys, tools, and domestic items found in patterns suggesting intentional placement rather than random decay. Human skeletal fragments in sealed niches, though partial decomposition and prior disturbance prevented full identification. Charred remnants of candles, ropes, and other ritual paraphernalia. Quote, "Some arrangements appeared preserved despite neglect. Whether due to material resilience or deliberate concealment is unclear. The patterns evoke intent rather than chance." Dahl, Survey Notes, 1950. Environmental anomalies. Localized cold drafts, unusual air circulation through collapsed walls. Acoustic phenomena. Soft echoes resembling whispers in certain chambers, despite minimal airflow. Subtle chemical odors, metallic, resinous, and faintly acrid, detected sporadically. Quote, "The house seems alive in its own way. Floors creak where no one stands. Shadows gather unnaturally in corners. These are not hallucinations, but consistent observations among multiple team members." Professor Holmquist, Field Journal. Ekstrom's testimony. "I've seen children playing near the cliffs, only to vanish for minutes and reappear, silent, pale. They never spoke of it, and neither did I." Interpretation and analysis. The final survey emphasized that while some elements could be explained through human action, others resisted rational interpretation. Hidden chambers and skeletal fragments indicate deliberate concealment and possible criminal activity. Patterns of artifact placement suggest ritualistic or symbolic intent. Environmental and sensory anomalies, cold pockets, whispers, fleeting shadows remained unexplained but consistently reported. Inspector Nyberg summarized in the final report, "We cataloged what we could, measured what was measurable, and recorded what was witnessed. Yet some aspects evade explanation. The estate, its history, and its traces refuse finality." Concluding reflections. The Krajholm estate became both a documented case of crime and secrecy and a locus for local myth. Its history spans verified disappearances, ambiguous family practices, and enduring psychological impact on the community. Quote, "No narrative can fully encompass the estate. Each document, each photograph, each oral account captures only a fragment. The rest remains a silence, layered and profound." Inge Dahl, Concluding Notes, 1950. Legacy. By 1950, the estate was partially stabilized for historical study, but remained largely inaccessible to the public. Stories of its shadows, whispers, and missing inhabitants persisted in local memory. The Krajholm estate became emblematic of the tension between historical fact and human imagination, a place where unresolved events, deliberate concealment, and psychological influence converge.